Have you ever had a similar experience as someone else and wondered why your outcome was so different? That's how I feel. In October of 2016, I fell down a hill and fractured my neck in 4 critical locations. The last thing I remember was reaching for branches to grab, trying to stop myself in any way possible, but I couldn't. Eventually, I landed on the top of my head, and that's when I lost consciousness. Over the course of my recovery, I've met a handful of individuals who also broke their necks. Their outcomes were different than mine because they have limited mobility in all 4 of their limbs. Every time I run, it kills me inside because I think about how easily I also could have been a quadriplegic.
Woke up to a beautiful sunny day and having a barbecue with a bunch of friends, and my buddy somehow got ketchup and mustard on his stomach. And I was talking to Dad, and he ran up behind me and gave me a hug from behind, got ketchup and mustard on my back. He's like, "Hurdle man, let's jump in the pool real quick." And we hopped the fence, jumped in, and next thing I remember, I was face down in the pool, like opened my eyes, and I tried to stand up, and I was like, what's going on here?
I tried to dive through an inner tube, and when I did that, my head hit the ground at the bottom of the pool. I was probably in the water for 15 to 30 seconds, maybe, before I ended up blacking out, but I knew, and I actually said, like, I'm gonna die, because I could see the top of the water, and I had about, my nose felt like I was about 2 inches from the surface.
I have amnesia from that whole day, so it happened late at night after a show that I was playing with my band. I was really confused. I thought the rest of the band was in the hospital with me because I figured we were in a car accident. That was actually one of the most confusing parts, was waking up and being like, what happened?
I woke up with someone holding me in C-spine, and Chris, my boyfriend, wiggling my toes, asking me if I could feel anything. And I could feel everything, but I couldn't move anything.
I sort of took a peek down and tried to see my legs, and they were almost like floating behind me. Tried to move them, I couldn't. I started yelling, like bubbles coming up, like, somebody help me here. Somebody call 911.
I remember waking up in a hospital room that was dead silent except for a ticking clock, thinking, where the hell am I? I looked over for my phone, and that's when I realized I couldn't move my neck.
They told me that I was an incomplete C4 quadriplegic, and that I was on a respirator, and that I probably wouldn't move anything below what I was moving at that point.
It's incredible how much you lose so quickly, to just go from hero to zero pretty quick. They did an amazing job for what they had to work with, like the imagery is pretty scary. I've got steel rods from C4 down to T1, nice screws, going all up the vertebrae, and these big rods holding it all together.
It was quick progression at the start. Like, I started moving my biceps again, my shoulders again, and again, it was just going through my mind, like, all right, we're gonna get back up on our feet here pretty quick. Towards the end of it, start to slow down, and that realization came, you know what, like, maybe this isn't gonna happen as quick as I wanted to.
I still have lots of those memories of thinking back to the hospital and to thinking about how bad my mobility was at that time. Every time you needed to do anything, I'd have to call the nurse, and the nurses would come down, and they had this electric hoist, that would lift me up out of bed and put me into the wheelchair, and then from that chair into a tub chair. And
I had head controls for the first couple weeks, which was very interesting, and it was a great way for me to become somewhat independent again.
So I ended up spending 78 days in the hospital up in Ontario, which was a challenge, you know, being away from home and family and stuff.
I was in the QE2 for 2 months, moved over to the rehab center on September 8th and stayed there for 8 months.
Then I went over to the rehabilitation center and I was there for 7 months.
So it was almost a year that I was in a hospital.
After meeting Connor, Aaron, and Jim, I really started to question and compare our outcomes. It seemed so unfair, and it consumed me for a long time. So eventually, I went back to visit my orthopedic surgeon to try and understand it all.
On the MRI scan that you had done, we were looking at the structures of the ligaments particularly. There was some cord signal change within the brainstem. What that implied, of course, was you were just, this far away. You damaged the vertebra bad enough, and in fact, you did it enough so that you actually, banged your spinal cord, where it's still actually the brainstem, which is the part that controls the breathing, the eating, the everything. Too much more force than you had. It could have been you didn't breathe and that was it. Wouldn't matter how quick they got to you. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, it's X minutes. It's not measured in minutes when you don't breathe, right? It's measured in seconds. In Marie's particular case, of course, when she presented, luckily she was neurologically intact, but she was in a lot of pain. And, we chose, for Marie's case, to use not surgical fixation, but external fixation. And that is very, very rigid fixation, but it does hold an unstable cervical spine very still, particularly C1 and C2 fractures. We all do things that when looking back, we're like, wow, that was way too risky. I shouldn't have done that. And luckily, the vast majority of the time you get away with it. And then, of course, you're in that situation where something happens. I think the first thing people think is, could I turn back the clock? How did I get in this situation? And you can't turn back the clock.
The first time I met Dr. Oxner, he discussed the severity of my injury. He told me I was lucky to be walking, let alone breathing, and that the majority of people with an injury like mine are very likely to be quadriplegic. And that somebody must have been watching out for me. In 2008, I lost the person who brought me into this world. I was only 14 when my mom died from cancer. Experiencing loss makes you realize how valuable and precious life is. But having a near-death experience yourself, that's a whole other wake-up call.
Some of the worst of it, I would say, was that initial, few weeks of kind of sorting it out in your head about what's actually happened and the severity of it and the potential for it to really alter your life forever. But somehow still having this innate desire to keep pushing, you have to, right? You don't have the option. You gotta keep going. What else are you gonna do? You're not gonna give up. I have this memory of thinking, like I could think my way out of it. Like I could just convince my feet to move, and I spent hours doing it.
Every night I would just constantly close my eyes and send messages to certain parts of my body to try and move them, Like I'd focus on my hands one night and my feet the next until something finally started moving. I went 28 days before I moved anything else.
And then when it finally flickered, it was a pretty amazing emotional experience. And I remember my family coming back in and I couldn't talk. And I had like a little alphabet board that I would use to communicate. But when they came in the room, I'd flick my toe and they were just like, oh my God, did you just do that? And then from there, it was a slow recovery, but every day, you'd see little things, little changes that would give you enough hope to keep pushing.
I'm way better than what I was in the ICU. Now I can push myself around in a manual chair and help feed myself and just do a whole bunch of stuff that I'm glad I can do.
About the 8th or 9-month mark was when I took my first steps. Then November 4th came along, my sister's wedding, and that was a huge milestone because I actually walked down the aisle at her wedding. And as soon as I came out of the doors in the chair, my eyes started watering because I'm like, oh my God, like this is the goal that I set 14 months ago, and now it's really happening. Every little movement, you know, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but then I look back and I go, okay, well, that plus that equals this. Like, this is how I am now because of everything else that happened throughout this journey. Growing up, I was a very active person, and my outlet for stress and even anger management was through sport, whether it was going for a run or snowboarding down a mountain or taking someone out in football, you know, like that was how I released any emotion that I needed to.
I love the sport. I grew up playing it for 18 years, not being able to put a pair of skates on and go on the ice for the past 2.5 years. It hurt, but I haven't thought about it as much as I thought I would. And I think that's, again, just a mental aspect of don't think about the stuff you can't do anymore. Just keep your positive mindset going, because again, the bad doesn't do anything for you.
You know, I can't work physically or manually like I used to be able to, but I can do what I need to do to live. And what I have now, I'm so grateful for. And I'll take the pain, I'll take the spasticity, just to be able to do what I can do now.
I've had to try and find other ways of releasing the stress from my life. I used to write back in the day, but I wrote for fun. Now I'm using writing as an outlet.
You learn how to deal with stuff differently. So going out, just hanging out with friends, and that's really the only way I can deal with it right now, because I'm not as able to do that, go to the gym and again, go play hockey.
I still have, you know, notable issues with my hands as a musician. They're not exactly where they were, and I'm learning to work around the issues that I have. You have to adapt. It's been great. Getting back to playing music has just been phenomenal. That was my, you know, #1 goal, was to get enough mobility to be able to play. I remember having that moment, just thinking like, I can do this. If this is as good as it gets, I can do this.
Physically, I'm not nearly as fit as I was before, but mentally, I'm way beyond what I was. And that's sort of what matters at this point, because without a strong mind, you're not gonna get anywhere.
I've always loved the quote, "Never grow a wishbone where your backbone ought to be." Coming from someone who broke their neck, you'd think that quote would be hard for me to relate to. But I think the message is still strong. Wishing things were not the way that they are, or waiting for something to change, is useless. Illness, injury, heartaches, heartbreaks, they're all gonna happen. But it's what we do in the face of tragedy that defines us.
You know, what am I gonna do when I'm older and have to live by myself? It's all that just races through your mind. I'm in this situation. There's nothing I can do at this moment in time to change that. So, I mean, you can't think bad. I'm always positive. That's part of my hope for Hurdle. I always have hope.
I guess I was not going to accept anything without giving it my all, you know? If I wasn't gonna walk, well, I'm gonna try my best to get there, and if I don't get there, well, at least I know that I put everything that I had into it, you know?
There's no rhyme or reason really to it. I think it's hard work, it's belief, it's support, it's all those things, but also some of it's just out of your hands, and you just gotta keep grinding.
I wanted to make this film to help other people with spinal cord injuries, but once I started shooting, I realized this was much bigger than that. These stories are a reflection of how precious life is. And by meeting these individuals and telling our stories, we were helping to heal ourselves.
There's a lot of stuff you can worry about, but worry about the main things in life that actually matter and talk about it.
I think we all go through things differently, but within that, there's so much that we all have in common, and we can surely find commonalities between each other to kind of ease the burden of trauma like that. More often than not, I think our lives are better than we give them credit for, and you got to really embrace what you have and those around you.
Live in the moment, love the people around you, show people that you love them, say thank you, say sorry, and be grateful.
You know, I think everybody in life can think back to times and relationships that they could have been more present at or with, and that's definitely been a big change for me.
You know, that old saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. I've never, understood it more than I understand it today.
Being that close to not having anything definitely, changes how I look at things when I wake up in the morning.
The definition of transformation is to make a thorough or dramatic change in the character of. In the face of grief and suffering, we have to change in order to survive. The real question is, how do you use this transformation to become more brave, compassionate, and resilient than you ever were before?
I have no record, brighter days. Your light is on me.
The other's called a hangman's fracture.
I can say.
And then when you go through the rest of the cervical spine, which is
have
down
no
here,
parts.
they can break in a number of different ways.
Have no lies, but I have you, and you have me, honey.